I was thinking about something the other day, and see if maybe this has ever happened to you. You're in some sort of event, maybe it's a sporting event, or you're watching sports, or you're in some exciting moment, and one of the things that we do in our American culture is we put our hands up, right? And we look around for somebody else to put their hand up as well. And then we smack them, and it's this amazing connection between us. It's incredibly dumb, and if another culture saw us do this like 100 years ago, they'd think we're out of our minds. But what happens when you put your hand up and nobody pays attention to you? Yeah, it's an embarrassing moment. And then you have to be cool about it, right? You have to go, and stretch and pull it back down. You have to do something because people leave you hanging sometimes. But fortunately, in most of our lives, when that happens, nobody knows about it, or maybe only just a few people know about it, but sometimes it happens on a bigger scale, like these poor people. Oh. And Tom, he can't get any love. No. But I love this guy. This is my favorite. The coach is so excited they just had a walk-off hit. I mean, he is ready to celebrate with his team. And they all come out of the dugout and all run around their coach. You see, we have this phrase, can't get no love. Can't get no love. Now, the obvious grammatical issues aside, we know what that means, right? It means that sometimes in life, you're in a situation and you just can't get any love. Nobody gives you the high five, nobody gives you the hug, and we sort of brush it off and we play it off, and it's really probably not that big a deal, but we've all been in a scenario where we felt that before, right? Yeah, sure. And so when we see it in this kind of context with the coach jumping up or Tom Brady looking for a high five, it's kind of funny. But what happens if it looks like this? Or maybe this guy. Literally stepping over another human being. You see, it's funny when we're just looking for some sort of celebratory reaction from people, but it's not so funny when we see people who truly need love and get none. But that's kind of the world we live in. We see an image like this and it kind of maybe surprises us in some context, but deep within you, you're not really that shocked, right? That if you've spent any time in any major urban center, you've seen images that look like this. We've seen people who are strewn on the streets, living their lives as best they can. And then we turn on the news, and we see images that look like this. We see anger. We see hate. We see responses, and however you feel about the things that are happening in this world, whatever side you're particularly on this topic, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that we live in a world that is really full of hate. People are upset. People are angry. And this world has become, it's become kind of a dark place. When you watch the news, when you turn on, whether it's the local or the national news, and you see these images, you hear the talks, it's all negative, it's all pessimistic, it's all bad, and you never really feel better after watching it, do you? I don't know why we keep doing it to ourselves. Maybe we want to stay informed, but I don't know. I just never really feel that good. Because it reminds me of what an awful place this world has become. And it makes me think of this song from, a decade or so ago, that says, people killing, people dying, children hurt and hear them crying. Would you practice what you preach? Would you turn the other cheek? Father, 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 help us. Send some guidance from above, because people got me questioning, where is the love? Where's the love? And that's kind of what I think about when I see these images from the world, and when I see people react the way that they're reacting to this abject poverty or to this anger and this hatred. I think, man, where's the love? Right? You ever thought that question? You ever looked around at this world we live in? You look around at this life and just say, man, where is the love? And perhaps you haven't stopped to think about how bad it's gotten. And this is what I give to you as an example of how far we have fallen away from love. Because we have stories like this. If you've been watching the Olympics, you probably heard about this. This runner stops to help the other one. I mean, in the middle of the race, it's the Olympics. You're thinking you've been training your entire life for this moment, and one falls down and the other one stops to pick it up. It's a beautiful story, right? But think of what the inverse is here. That we have fallen so far away from being a world of love that when we see a little glimmer of it, it becomes international news. Right? This is an international news story because this woman did something that you teach your 5-year-old to do. Right? If something falls down, you pick them up. And it becomes a worldwide sensation. That's where our world is. That when we see little instances of love, we lose our minds. How could this be possible? How could we love like this? Where is the love? And I just have to wonder, how did we get to this point? How did we get here? How did we get so far away from the things that we would have hoped in this life, the love that we would have seen? Because we know how Genesis 1 starts. We know the creation story. We know that God has created this world in love, but yet how did we end up here? Don't you want to know that? How did we end up here? Well, we don't have to look too much farther past creation. You know what happens in Genesis 4, right? We obviously have Adam and Eve outside the garden, and so they have 2 kids. And we know they're Cain and Abel, and we know what is eventually going to take place in the lives of Cain and Abel. But what you may not have remembered is this is the first time we see the word anger. Because Cain and Abel are sort of opposites in what they do. They're both farmers in a way, but you know that Cain takes care of the plants. And we know that Abel has the animals. And they both offer sacrifices to God, but what does Cain do? He offers the lower sacrifice, the stuff that falls on the ground, and Abel offers the best stuff, the fattened calves. And so we see out of that response, Cain sort of feel a particular way because God doesn't recognize and honor his offering in the same way he does to Abel. And we pick up in verse 5 because I want you to see this. We know what Cain's going to do. That's not any sort of secret. But what you may not looked at is this dialogue that takes place between Cain and God. In verse 5, it starts off as this. But for Cain and for his offering, he had no regard. God had no regard. So Cain became very angry, and his countenance fell. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry, and why is your countenance fallen? If you do well, will not your countenance be lifted up? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door, and its desire is for you, but you must master it." Cain gets very angry. First time we see that word. Why is he angry? He's angry because his life is apparently not the way that he would have it to be. We don't know why he's so discontent with his life, but obviously he's got some issues inside, right? Because when he looks over and he sees that God is honoring his brother more than him, it makes him jealous. And what we see that jealousy breed is anger. You see, and this is sort of the continuum that Cain goes on. He goes from this discontent, he becomes jealous, he gets angry, and what does that anger lead to? Hate. And the result of Cain's hate is ultimately the death of his brother. But did you notice in this dialogue with God, God is saying, Cain, you're at a really dangerous point. I know that you're upset. I know that your countenance has fallen. That's his spirit, that's his being, his disposition has fallen. He's down in the dumps about this. And God says, I know that you're there, but be really careful. Because this is a tipping point for you. You can choose to go one way or the other. Because sin is crouching at that door because, what do we know about sin? Sin wants to grasp hold of that anger, lead it to hate, and then hate does all sorts of terrible, destructive things, right? And so there's a bigger story here. We just kind of skip ahead and we say, yeah, Cain, Abel, dead. Okay, now Abel, now, okay, we need somebody else. So Seth, ta-da. That's kind of how we go through Genesis, right? But look at this as a person. Look at this as the first angry man. And that anger caused him to sin. Now, I wouldn't say that this sort of flow chart here is the only way that we can end up at hate, but I would put for your consideration that this is the way it happens a lot. We become discontent in our lives. We're not happy with where we are. Maybe we're mad at what God has done for us or to us, or that's the way we think. Maybe we're not pleased with where our life is, what we have or don't have, what we want and what we can't get. That naturally leads to jealousy for us. Because we look outside and we say, I'm not happy where I am. I like where you are. I want to be there. And when we can't get there, we get mad. And if we let that anger fester long enough, it turns into hate. And hate can do terrible things. You see, that's what's happened to this world. They've slid down this slide of discontentment to hate. And now we find ourselves where we are. And it all started with Cain. And so the question becomes for us, how do we live in this world that's so full of hate? Because we exist here. None of us are going anywhere. We haven't perfected space travel enough for all of us to disappear from here. So how are we going to live here? How are we going to exist in this? Because here's the problem with us living in a world of hate. It starts to infect even us good Christians. It starts to get into our lives too. It starts to make us pessimistic. It starts to make us negative. It starts to infest us, and it even comes into the ecclesia. It comes into the body. It comes into the church. We have seen what anger, what hate, what jealousy, what negativity can do to churches, haven't we? We've seen what it can do to people within the family, the ones who call themselves brothers and sisters of Christ. So we live in this world and it permeates us, but what are we supposed to do? We can't go anywhere else. So maybe we have to look at an example of somebody who did the same thing. And I would argue there's no better place to look for an example than Jesus. Jesus lived in a world that was so full of hate. He lived, in fact, with people named Pharisees as the group, and I would argue that there is not an angrier group of people in the Scriptures than those folks. You see phrases like this written all the time when we're talking about the Pharisees. They're always filled with rage. They're always burning with anger. Nearly every encounter that you read about the Pharisees ends with something like this. They always walk away mad. That anger is going to turn to hate. That hate's going to kill Jesus. Now imagine, if you will, living in this world full of hate like we do, but having this hate instead directed not just sort of generally in the atmosphere, but at you. And that puts us closer to feeling what he feels. So how does he live with this? How does he survive in this world that is so full of hate, that is so directed at him? Well, I think it's amazing what we're going to see. Now, the Pharisees like to test him, like to trip him up, like to try to test him in different ways with different sort of plays on the Scriptures, and they do that again in Matthew chapter 22. Now, you know, if you have studied your Scriptures, what they're going to ask him here in this chapter. They're going to ask him a very difficult, in their minds, and a very tricky question. What's the greatest command? Now, before you jump ahead in your answer, because you know it, as you should know it, but when they ask him what's the greatest command, think about what that means. Look at what this question is. How is this a setup? They're talking about all of the laws of Moses. They're talking everything that God has ever given to his people, and then, of course, their laws that they sort of added to the pile. But they're saying, out of all of that, pick one. Now, if we were human instead of Jesus, we would have probably fumbled that. Because how do you pick one and say, this is the most important that God has ever spoken to his people? That is ripe for conflict, and that's what the Pharisees are hoping to do. Because each one of us might pick something different, and then what are we going to do? We're going to fight about it, and then they're going to catch Jesus in this, and they're going to manipulate and twist it, and they're going to say, here, look, finally we have something. But in all of this hate, in all of this deception that they're trying to pull on Jesus, how does he answer that question? This is the time you can tell me. How does he answer that question? He says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind. Now, nobody can argue with that, right? The brilliance of wisdom of Jesus answers this question that is meant to trip him up and is dripping with hate and loathing and rage. And he says, it's love. But because he's Jesus, he uses this as an awesome teaching moment, and he doesn't just answer their question, right, with one answer. He says there's a part two. And what's part two? Love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus takes this question they asked him in hate, and he says, it's all about love. Now, do you see the beautiful symmetry that Jesus gives us? To say here we have this world that is just full of hate and it's directed at him, and he could respond in any manner he wanted to, but he says it's love. It's all about love. Wow. I can't even imagine the ability that it would take for us to respond to the hate in this manner. Because if I held up both of those choices, and I said, you have to choose one, or you get to choose one. You either love God with everything that you have, or you love others as you love yourself. Which would you prefer? Which would be more attractive to you? If you had to do one of those two, which one would you want? I'm thinking it's going to be the first. I'm thinking my human mind is going to think, okay, if I have to love, I'm going to love God. Why? Because, come on, he's God. Now, we know that that's hard. We know that it's a struggle. But isn't it better for us in our minds, in our earthly human minds, to love God? Because, man, he's given us so much. I mean, we know John 3:16. We know that God loved us so much that he gave his son. So I think I can, kind of in a way replicate that, or at least give back. It makes sense to me. But loving my neighbors as myself. I'd be a lot happier if God said, or Jesus here said, tolerate them. That I probably could do. I could probably put up with my neighbors. I could probably deal with them. But love them? And you notice the standard that Jesus chooses here. He doesn't say just love them. Like when you're a parent and you tell your kid, tell your sister you love her, and they go, love you. Right? That's what Jesus, if Jesus just stopped there and said, love your neighbors, I think we would go, I love you, neighbor. But he says, love your neighbors as yourself. That's the standard he put, knowing full well that we as humans love ourselves a lot. Look out for number one. Take care of me. You're taught that from a young age. You know that you are a priority in your life. You don't really have to be taught that. And that's the standard Jesus holds us to. Love your neighbor as yourself. So in this world full of hate, Jesus responds, it's all about love. And the instruction then becomes to us in this world of all this hate is to love our neighbors as ourselves. Okay, fine. I can love my family. I can love my friends. I can love those people who love me. Fine, I'll do that. You happy? Of course not. Because it's love your enemies. Do good those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. Why? The second half of Luke 6 here. Because if you love those who love you, what credit is to you? For even sinners love those who love them. Oh, man, Jesus has an answer every time we have a rebuttal. Every time we think that we're close to okay, fine, I'll get away with that if I just do this much. Jesus says, no, it's not about that. If you're going to love all the way. And you're going to love the neighbors, not just the people who look like you, not just the people who talk like you, not just the people who smell like you. You're going to love all of them as yourself. Because that's what distinguishes you from the rest of the world. Anybody can love people who love them. That's easy. But loving people who are unlovable, that's your challenge. See, we live in this world that is so full of hate and anger, and it's directed at all the wrong things, but they do it anyway, and we're called to love. So how do we do that? That's always my question. I read these things in the scriptures, and I think, wow, that's great. That is an awesome idea. How do I do it? How do we do this? How do we love like Jesus? How do we really love in the way that he does? And this is it. There's no magic to this. It is a simple key. It is that we have to stop seeing people as people and start seeing them as souls. That's really what it takes. Now, I know easier said than done, but that's the concept here, and it comes up in 1 Samuel. You see, it says that God sees not as man sees, for man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Now, you know this scripture. This is one that's pretty popular, and I think we have to put it in terms of maybe that parental-child relationship. Because you think about it, for those of you who have kids, think about that little child. Sometimes that child smells, right? It happens. Even when they're like 15, 16, maybe especially when they're like 15, 16. That kid smells. That kid's going to get messed up. That's going to get dirty. It's going to do things that you don't want it to do. It's going to be frustrating. It's going to be angry. You're going to be so just want to shake that kid, but don't do that. I don't want to represent you. But you just want to shake that kid. But as parents, how do you see them? Yeah, they smell, and yeah, they're dirty, and yeah, they're doing things that you don't want them to do. But don't you see them the same way they came out? I know that my mother, she's so awesome, but I know at 32, she still looks at me as if she could hold me. Because that's what parents do. You see, parents look past all of this outward stuff, and as frustrating, as difficult it is, how come you don't ever give up on them? Because you see them as they really are. As your baby. God sees not as we see in the outward appearance, but he sees the soul. Why? Because he made it. When we see the people that are getting stepped over on the street, God doesn't see or smell them. He sees the soul. And the way that we need to love as Jesus does is by recognizing that it's not about the outward appearance, it's about what's on the inside. I mean, think about that in Jesus' mind, and that really is how he can look at these people in the face. That's the reason he can wash the feet of Judas, because it doesn't matter about the outside. It's not that he condones it or accepts the sin, but he sees them as the soul that they need to be taught. That's the love like Jesus. It's getting past the outward physical and looking to what's on the inside. That's what we have to do. But it's so hard for us too. We're so blinded by the things of the world, but that is our mission and our goal, and that's what Peter talks about in chapter 4. Because watch what happens. Above all, keep fervent in your love. Fervent here means striving for, passionate in our love for one another. Why? Because love covers a multitude of sins. Now, you've used this verse, I'm sure, many times before in your life. Recognize what it says here. This doesn't mean that we condone the actions of others. This doesn't mean that we just accept sin and go, oh, it's no big deal. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that love peels back the layers, that sinful outer shell, and shows us what's inside. And what's inside is something that is fearfully and wonderfully made by God. When we love people, it peels off the outside. It covers it. It washes it. It allows us to see them for what they are, and they are made by God, and they are souls that he wants with him. We have to love first in order for this to take place. But when we do, watch what Peter says next. When we do in verse 9, it tells us that we can be hospitable to one another without complaining. Well, imagine that. Take that verse, put it on your mirror, staple it to your arm. Look at that verse. Be hospitable to one another without complaining. As each one has received a special gift, employ it in serving one another as good stewards of the manifold grace of God. Whoever speaks is to do so as one who is speaking the utterances of God. Whoever serves is to do as one who is serving by the strength which God supplies, so that in all things God may be glorified through Jesus Christ, to whom belongs the glory and dominion forever and ever. Did you notice what Peter does? Peter's sneaky, okay? Because he lures you in with the love. He says, it's about love, and love's going to cover the multitude of sins. And you were probably going, okay, maybe that sounds interesting. And you see what he smacks you with? He says, when you love the people and you peel back the layers, then what do you do next? You serve them. Do you see that process? He says, when you love the people, then you serve them. See, first we love, we peel back that outer layer, we're no longer looking at the physical, and now we can open up our hearts to serve the people with everything that God gives to you, the very words and strength that he supplies. You see, this is that flow chart then that comes from love. Love breeds this service, and then you notice what he ends with. That when you love and when you serve, who gets the credit? When you love, then you're able to serve. I think we do this out of order sometimes. I think as Christians, we have sort of smacked the idea of service in our brains. Serve, 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 serve. This is what you're supposed to do. Serve, 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 serve. But we forget the love step. And that's why we start to complain. That's why we're like, yeah, okay, I'm supposed to serve you, but I don't really want to. Here you go. Oh, service projects. Ugh. I got to spend an entire morning in Mexican town. You see, we just serve because we're obligated to serve. We're told to serve. But it's because we're missing the love, right? When we skip over the love step and we just go to service, then we serve with a bad attitude. First, we have to love. And when we love, then we don't see the outward side. We don't smell the foul odor. We don't go, oh, I don't want to be around this person. We don't see that because we see them as a soul and we love them. And our natural response to the person that we love is to give. Parents, you do that all the time. Family, friends, you do that all the time. You love and you serve at the same moment. But when it comes to the outside world, we just go, here, take it. Because we don't love first. But when we do this in the right order, and we love the people, and we serve the people, then the world and the folks around us are going to go, that's different. And that's our opportunity to say, glory and honor to God. God has set up a perfect system. Everything works to the glory of him if we follow his plan. We have to love first, serve, and then folks are going to notice. And when we do, we get to point to him. But we get those steps out of order if we get them at all. And that's where we find ourselves today. Do we love like Jesus? And I don't even necessarily mean for this moment individually as Christians. I mean collectively. Do we here, the body, the ecclesia of Christ here in Taylor, do we love like Jesus? Do we love in the way that he has called us to love? Do we serve in the way that is loving? I grew up in the churches of Christ. Most of you have. We are so bad at this, historically. Because we have been all about 100% truth, which is awesome. And we should be. But we have taken our truth as a sword, and we've cut people's heads off with it. We do it all the time. Because we have said truth, truth, truth. But no love. And so we take our truth, and we even sing about this. And man, Dad used this song last week in a different example, and I don't want to disparage anybody who likes this song, but Jesus is Coming Soon is a really weird song, folks. Because it's written to a march. You know, it's upbeat. Bum-bum-bum-bum. And we say, many will meet their doom, and we do it with a smile on our face. Don't we? Like we're marching along. Many will meet their doom. Ha, stinks to be you. Trumpets are going to sound for me, buddy. That's our attitude. Our attitude in this world has been, we have the truth, and we're really happy about it, and I'm sorry for the rest of you. And it's not even just us within the churches of Christ, it's Christianity as a whole. We have taken some of these issues like transgender and homosexuality and abortion, and we have gotten past the truth part and we've made it personal about people. And so now you see these images of people throwing garbage at these young women who are going into these abortion clinics. Are they ever going to see love of Jesus that way? Never. We are never going to show the love that God has if we just beat people with the truth. Now, this is an important caveat here. We're not saying that we condone any of the sin at all. We're not saying that truth isn't important, because it is. But we're doing it in the wrong order. You see, remember that we have to love, we have to serve, and we see it here. Watch this, in 1 John, he says, we know love by this, that he laid down his life for us. Awesome. That's how we see love. So we ought to lay down our lives for the brethren. But whoever has the world's goods and sees his brother in need and closes his heart against him does not have love, because the love of God does not abide in him. Now here's the kicker. Little children. He calls us kids because we need to pay attention. Let us not love with word or with tongue, but in deed and truth. You see, John says it's not leaving out truth, but it's got to be done in the right order. We have to love, we have to serve, we have to teach. We have to love, we have to serve, we have to teach. And we've been so bad at doing that we've just brought in the truth without any love, without any service, and people, the world, has been repulsed by it. True? Christians have a good rap in society today? Nope. What are we? We're hate mongers, right? Oh, you're the people who don't like anybody else. Does that describe Christians? What we're called to be? We're called to be the people who are the most full of love and service of anybody on this planet. Right? But we've taken our truth, we've cut people down, and now the world has tuned us out. I don't care what you have to say because you don't like me. I don't care what you have to say because you don't serve me. I don't care what you have to say because I feel like you hate me. When we look at some of these issues that have just become talking points, and we really break it down, and we think about that individual, have you really thought about that young man or that young woman who is thinking in their mind because they have been influenced by the sin in the world around them that maybe I want to be something else? Have you thought about the heart that's inside of that little body and the confusion that's going through them, and then you want to stand up and say, hey, yeah, man, you're wrong? You'll never reach him. But what if instead we became a body that said, oh, how can I help you? I love you. I want to serve you. And when they see the love of God, they see the service in the hands that we provide to him, that opens the door. That unlocks the heart. Because now we can say, now let me teach you. This is the system that God designed. This is the way that he set it up. And instead, when we live in this world of hate, I'm afraid, provide more. Instead of responding the way that Jesus did, with love. The more that I study, the more that I read, the more convinced I become that nothing else matters, folks. That there's no way that we are going to grow as a body in Taylor, but more than that, grow as a body of Christians in this world if we don't get this love thing figured out quickly. Because it's all about love. I can feel pretty confident in saying that that's the most important thing since Jesus did. You know that Jesus could have quoted anything from Leviticus. He could have quoted anything, any of the sins of the world. He could have quoted that and said, that's the most important. But he didn't. He says it's about love. So if he said it, we probably should say it too. So here we live in this world. It's a pretty dark place. It's a pretty rough place. And we get discouraged. And we look around. And we say, man, you just can't change what's going on. I know we've all had that feeling. We've all looked at our culture, our America, the changes that take place here, and go, you just can't change it. You better learn to live with it. Can't change it. Can't change this hate in the world. And I would say that's probably true if you don't do the second part. You see, you can't change what's going on around you until you change what's going on within you. And what's going on within us, we got a love crisis. We got to figure out as Christians how we're going to love everyone. Not just those that walk in the door, not just those that look like us, not just those that smell like us. We got to love everybody. And when we do, we serve them. And when we do, we teach them to give them glory to God. It's the way that God set this thing up. It's the way that his church grows. It's the way that Jesus taught in his ministry and grew his following, by loving them. You remember that's the biggest problem the Pharisees had with him? Among many things. Because he loved the unlovable. So that's our job. Good? Ready? Get some lunch? We'll go attack it? All right. Folks, we have an awesome family here. We really do. And I believe that we love each other pretty well. But we got to turn that outside now. But we have an opportunity to support each other here, and that's awesome. And this morning is another one of those chances. Publicly, you are welcome to come up here and ask for love and support. And it is our job, our duty as brothers and sisters to give it to you. But to do more than just talk. Wouldn't that be great? To do more than just say, I love you. I'll see you on Wednesday. But to actually serve. To actually teach. So we have that opportunity this morning if you would like to partake in that. Also for those who have not received the ultimate gift of love, the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross, we want to talk with you as well. You have the opportunity to be baptized this morning, to start fresh and new, and to receive the greatest gift of love ever in the world. If there's any way that we can be of service to you this morning, don't miss this opportunity. But for the rest of us, the 98% that are going to sit in the pews, don't miss this opportunity to love today. Everyone. Including those guys that are on the ramps going to the highways, including those people that smell, including those people who you wouldn't talk to if it were the last breath on earth. We got to be a family that loves. Any way that we can be of service, don't hesitate as we stand and sing.